Alright everyone, all sorts of interesting stuff today. First and foremost, there will be another Happy Homelands live stream later. Of course, I'm Ramsey Paul's co-host for that show. We've got Gavin McInnes actually on now today. That will be at 11 a.m. 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central Time, and here it's 5 p.m. Local. We gotta start off though talking about the total sham that was yesterday's MSNBC interview of Joe Biden. Because they had him on the Morning Joe thing. It's funny because you have, Joe and Joe. So poor Mika doesn't know who's being referred to probably at any given time. She's got some issues. Now, these two have been profiled by Trump now for several years. And it's funny because initially they were like kind of sort of, if not pro-Trump, at least they tolerated him. And they're like, well, he's sort of been our friend and we sort of get him. Then they decided to do a 180. The second he got elected, of course, he became a virulent orange bigot in their minds, despite not doing anything. But this interview, let me be entirely clear, because when it was first announced the day before, I said this is going to be a softball interview that's designed to be very pro-Biden, and there's not going to be any real probing of the Tara Reade allegations. That's exactly what happened, but even then, even in an interview which only had a couple of pointed questions, and they were only thrown in there for appearances, trust me, he got these questions beforehand, he knew he was going to be asked specifically what was asked, I guarantee it, because he would not have agreed to the interview if he didn't. He has no reason to agree to an interview unless he gets the questions beforehand, and there's no gotchas, and there were no gotcha moments here. Despite the fact that only twice did Mika actually asked him anything pointed, and the rest of it was a love fest. I love Joe Biden. I think he's a great guy. Yeah, I believe him. Joe, how do you respond to this absolute Russian asset liar's allegations that are totally false against you? What do you have to say about this torrid son of a bitch? That's basically like 90% of the bulk of this thing, and link in the description. You can go and watch it for yourself. He still managed to fail. Biden is so terrible at answering questions and holding discourse that he literally couldn't even, and there was a point there, and this is the famous clip, but I decided to, for context, to put out the full link there. It's to MSNBC's page, so you should probably give it a downvote, just saying. But, I mean, he was asked, so, there would be no mention of Tara Reade in your records, the sealed senatorial records that are at the University of Delaware, and he's like, no, essentially. He knows of no formal complaint that would be in there. Then he was asked, and by the way, the National Archives have weighed in and totally contravened him, but that wasn't covered by CNN and MSNBC. I wonder fucking why. They did that within hours, because Trump prodded them to. So she asked, well, why don't you allow some group to go in, a commission or whoever, to go in and search for Tara Reade in those records to find anything pertinent? Because his qualm, and here's another way in which he flubbed it, and this was overlooked by a lot of people because his epic brain fart moment, which was a little bit like Marco Rubio's meltdown, it really was his Marco Rubio moment. This could actually hurt him kind of substantially. We'll wait and see what happens in the polls. That may happen, though. What happened is he said, well, he wouldn't release these records. You can go to the National Archives to look at whatever you want, but this contains like personal correspondence and platform memos and stuff like internal stuff. No, because it might be used as fodder in a campaign against me. It's like, so you're so proud of your career. You constantly talk about your record, your experience, but you don't want anyone to look into it. That's optics problem number one, because you're the experience candidate. You've been in politics since the goddamn 70s. He was a senator from the early 1970s, from the fucking dawn of the Jimmy Carter era, actually a little bit before that, I believe, all the way up through until he was VP. He's been in office continuously for that whole period until a couple of years ago when Obama leaves, and of course he's no longer VP. He's been a senator and vice president for the vast majority of his life. Again, a senator from the dawn of the 70s all the way through the 80s, the 90s, almost all of the 2000s, and VP for 8 years. I mean, Christ, he's been in office for, almost half a century, all told. And all of the Senate career stuff, the bulk of his career, is in these records. So you're saying you love the fact that you were a senator so long, you accomplished so much, and yet you don't want these records released. And I can tell you, it's more than Tara Reade. The Tara Reade allegation is just the spark that has lit the brush fire underneath him that forces him to respond to these things. I guarantee, though, the real reason he doesn't want his Senate records released from there, but with the internal correspondence, the platform talking points, Think about response to the AIDS crisis, the Iran-Contra scandal, the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, all the Patriot Act era bullshit, the ending of the Vietnam War, all of the different Reagan era little microstate invasions. All of these things he was in the Senate for. And he was heavy-hitting enough, because he was later on, I believe, Senate Judiciary, fairly high up. He had access to a lot of shit, and he would have responded to all of these crises. He would have been expected to do that as part of his job, again, for the vast majority of 4 fucking decades. I guarantee you'd find what would be perceived of as homophobic language, probably racially tinged language, probably in attendance to maybe the AIDS crisis or something like that, certainly language that would have indicated that early on he was not exactly progressive on these issues. You'd find all these things. He'd probably weighed in on gay marriage, on abortion, on all these things. He doesn't want that private correspondence coming out, because some of those platform memos would have been draft memos. Well, this is what Joe Biden thinks, and then he goes into a meeting and people tell him, hey, Joe, it's a good idea to pretend you don't think that, because otherwise you get booted out of office. Oh, you think that we should put people with AIDS on an island? Maybe that's not a good long-term political strategy. Maybe you should walk that one back and just say, man, we need a national registry or something. That's the sort of thing that he doesn't want out in the public. With Trump, it's not a problem. Donald Trump was a frequent radio guest, Stern Universe aside. It was in the public eye, wearing his politics on his goddamn sleeve after 9/11. He's been doing that since at least the 1980s. Because he was an 80s mogul, he was a 90s entertainer. In the 2000s, he was sort of part of that that Survivor era MTV sort of hegemon within entertainment. He doesn't have that problem. Everyone knows what he thinks. His goofy views and his realistic views are all out there for the world to see in 1,000 goddamn interviews just through the legacy media. With Joe Biden, we're talking about private correspondence, again, platform draft memos and things like that. So Joe Biden flubbed that, and that was the most important part. But everyone's focused on what happened next, which was people said, well, okay, you don't want all this potentially confidential stuff, this private stuff out there for, crazy reasons, because you love your record, but you're ashamed of it and you're afraid it'll be used as fodder against you. What does that say about what's in your fucking senatorial records? Why don't you have an independent commission go and look through just for Tara Reade stuff to corroborate what you're saying, if what you're saying is true? Joe Biden sat there for almost 10 seconds solidly staring at the camera with a slight grin on his face and didn't even answer the question. He didn't even answer. He had a Marco Rubio meltdown moment. He didn't know how to answer the question because there's no legitimate reason. All he could counter with was, well, you wouldn't find that in there because there's nothing about it in there. That would be in the National Archives. But then the National Archives weighed in and said, no, it wouldn't be. It would be in the Senate records at the University of Delaware. You're wrong, Mr. Biden. If there was a complaint, it would not be in the National Archives. It would be in your official Senate records, along with your memos and all of your internal correspondence. The National Archives just debunked his claim. Liar, liar, pants on fire. I bet that Snopes is not going to weigh in and fact-check elements of this interview, not without good reason, because all of these people want Biden to be the president. A lot of people want Biden to be the president because they think it'll easily give him the first female president because he'll probably have to resign due to his Alzheimer's or croak in office because he's almost 80. Number one. And number two, they know he's a puppet. He's easily controlled. He doesn't have a mind of his own. He's a steward candidate. If he wins, he's the steward on the throne. He's not the one in charge. A circle of advisors is in charge, his fucking staff and things like that. By the way, at a time of crisis like we're in, the reheating of the Cold War, or recooling you could say, pandemics and all of these other problems, don't you think it might be nice to have somebody independent in the presidency? Well, we've already got one. You don't have to like his policies, but by and large, for the first few years until very recently, things were going pretty well. No major wars or escalations of wars. The economy was churning right along. It was doing at least as well as the Obama economy that all of the liberals always told me was so great. And then some. Stock market is still rising at the moment. The things were going well. We had someone at least reasonably competent. He didn't have a huge amount of experience. He had no political experience going to the presidency. Still did better than people who had been in office for 40 years. Joe Biden doesn't have a mind of his own. He is literally goddamn demented. Watch the interview. You can tell it. You can tell this is not a dude playing with a full deck. You're arguing to me that somehow Joe Biden would be the lesser of two evils versus Donald Trump? I don't care even about the Tara Reade allegations. The best thing about the Tara Reade allegations is it forces people to question why he doesn't want those records released. The big question people should be asking is what else is in there that he doesn't want out there in the public. I guarantee there's a lot of it. It's funny because these people thought it was so totally important that we understand exactly how much money Trump made for the last 30 years. Like his income is somehow responsible for all of his platforms and his ability to govern. That was a big ticket item for an entire year of campaigning. Why can't we see how much money you made? Well, I'm under audit, so my lawyers say don't release any paperwork because we're still being audited. Oh, you've got something to hide. But here you've got his Senate records. They can be unsealed anytime. A private commission can be put forth to go in and look through it. They're only asking to look for Tara Reade stuff. If I were them, I'd be attempting to use the courts to force the divulgence of those records as pertinent to the political situation that we're now in. He's a presidential candidate. Yes, we should have access to his Senate records. Why should some university, which takes taxpayer funding, by the way, it's a public university, why should they be able to sequester these documents when there's a legitimate concern that there might be some fishy shit in there? It's not the same as tax forms protected by the Fourth Amendment. These are Senate records. They should be public already. They were already scheduled for release. Then he decided to run for the presidency, and I bet that Biden himself called his alma mater and said, don't goddamn release those papers, whatever you do. Because even though I've got dementia, I can remember that I said and did some shit that leftists today would be goddamn livid at. The thing is this. Donald Trump, again, he wore his politics on his sleeve. In the 80s and the 90s, by God, he was a business dem. Joe Biden, arguably, is further right. If you listen to his private correspondence, and you're eventually going to get it, like when he's no longer running or whatever, when he's no longer in public life, supposedly. I guarantee when you match up the things that Biden believed, or at least publicly stated, and the draft memos and all of that, to what Trump publicly stated over the course of at least 20 to 30 years, you're going to find that Joe Biden's the one that's the bigot. At least by modern standards. That's what he's afraid of. Because the Bernie bros will destroy him. If he doesn't get them aboard, he loses. People don't understand. He doesn't have a coalition. Business Dems are not going to support Joe Biden. I'm sorry, but I don't believe these matchup polls in half of these states anyway, because they don't goddamn make sense. Then when you apply the enthusiasm gap, it wouldn't even matter if you were 5 to 10 points ahead. It literally might not even matter at this point. Biden is a steward candidate. He's a controlled person. He's controlled by Pelosi, and he's controlled by Tom Perez, and he's controlled by Barack Obama, I'm sure, to an extent too, the more talented of the two by far, and still able to make a coherent sentence most of the time. He's controlled by people like that, and by the other people within the party that kind of know what they're doing. Biden doesn't. But he does know that his Senate record would keep him from being elected. Well, he does want to be president. He still gets to be put in the history books as a person who occupied the highest office in the land. He doesn't care whether he's the one really making the decisions. Hell, Obama would basically be our president again. Some people like that idea. I think it sucks. That's about all. Peace out.